Here we are again, delving deeper and deeper into Star Trek, and especially Star Trek Adventures RPG. I'm Michael Dismuke, freelance writer for Star Trek Adventures RPG and lead writer on Captain's Log. Also, fan fiction writer in Star Trek Explorer magazine. A lot of good things going on. And of course, this is not a show unless we have with us the fantabulous Jim Johnson.
Hey everybody, Jim Johnson. I'm the project manager and line editor for the Star Trek Adventures RPG and the Captain's Log solo RPG, both published by Modiphius Entertainment. Below these many years, co-hosting this here show, going on 2+ years strong, 150 odd episodes. Looking forward to finding new things to talk about. There's never a shortage of things to talk about. So here we are talking about more cool stuff tonight. And before I introduce our special guest for the evening, Michael, it's not fan fiction. You were paid for it.
You're right. Man, that's hard to remember, but thank you for calling that out.
I mean, technically, all licensed fiction is fan fiction because obviously it's written by fans. But there's a delineation between fanfic that's posted online and fiction that is professionally paid for and published. So don't. I know you weren't intentionally denigrating yourself, but don't do it. Don't denigrate yourself.
Thank you.
You were paid for that work. It was published, and it's going to be reprinted in an anthology, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right, coming out December 10th, I believe. Yeah.
And I'm very sad to hear that the magazine will be ending after the next couple of issues, and this might possibly be the last collected anthology, just depending on how things go, because they may not be able to do another one after this. So, congratulations on getting in under the wire, even though no one knew until after the fact, right? So,
I know, crazy stuff. I trust technology and innovation will bring it back in some form or fashion.
Knock on wood. Hope that happens. The Star Trek universe is in desperate need of a good short fiction market, and I think the magazine was the only one really, because even Star Trek Adventures, we don't really do short fiction. We do sidebars, right? And certainly a bunch of writers have done sidebars, which has been great, but it's a little different than a short story. It's harder to condense a story into 100 words as opposed to several thousand. Although flash fiction is a thing. But anyway, I digress.
That's for another episode.
I'll say that for another episode. Yes, but yes, for tonight's episode, we have a special guest star with us tonight. No stranger to this show. He's been with us for many, many, many shows, and he's been with me throughout the entire life of Star Trek Adventures, all the way back from first edition all the way up to now. So, without more ado, Aaron, introduce yourself, please.
Hi, I'm Aaron Pollyea. I'm longtime Star Trek Adventures writer. I'm generally your starships and technology kind of guy, science guy. But tonight I've put on not a literal different hat, but just a different hat tonight.
An amazingly different hat. Just so anyone who doesn't know, who hasn't been listening to this podcast for a long time or watching it on YouTube right now, Aaron is wearing the hat of the USS Pioneer, wherein he plays our Chief Science Officer, Commander Talik Jav Nalanid, who is a Tellarite. And we're here to talk about Tellarites all night because I have to admit, I fall in love with them because of Aaron's playing for so many years. Man, you've been playing in the Pioneer for what, 3 years now? Has it been 3 or more years?
3, yeah, I think about three. And I've probably put in, I should have looked before we started. I've probably put in like 70,000 words worth of short fiction dealing with Nalanid too, as like flashbacks or personal logs, flash forwards even.
Yeah. You've definitely written more about Tellarites than anybody in Alpha Canon has. I agree with that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so we want to talk about this tonight. Now, the reason why is because we did a show about Klingons not too long ago, and that really went well. It was received well. And some people asked us, well, what about the other species? And we were like, yeah, you're right. So, Jim, what's your angle as we go into this? How do you want to tackle talking about Tellarite?
The great thing about having a podcast and having the Star Trek universe to talk about is that we have no shortage of species to bring up. So if we need to get a few extra episodes into the lineup, hey, we'll pick a species. We'll talk about it for 45 minutes or so. Why not? So recently, Modiphius, we did a whole series of blog posts talking about all the 14 species that are in the core rulebook, and why not do a bunch of episodes on each species, right? Because they're all interesting, they're all cool. And And my encouragement to both Rachel Cruz and to Patrick Goodman when they were working on those blog posts was to emphasize why this species is the coolest species to play, right? Like make those hard choices. Like there's so many cool things, and Aaron's got the experience on the Pioneer, playing the I'm wearing your hat in honor tonight, so thank you for the hat in honor of your campaign and your character. We're showing some love for the Pioneer. So let's talk all about Tellarites.
Let's start with why play a Tellarite. Guest of honor, Aaron, start with us. Why play a Tellarite? We'll go around for each of us.
Okay, well, why play a Tellarite? I love being able to look at a situation in game, like in the universe as a Tellarite, and go, why is this happening? And why are you just taking it for granted? Basically just looking at a situation and approaching it in a completely different way, not because you want to approach it a different way, but because you feel like you need to actually explore that avenue. And it all boils down to this whole idea of Tellarites arguing, debating, playing devil's advocate, trying to look at a situation from all sides.
I like that. I like that. We're going to get deeper into that. Jim, why play a Tellarite?
I think Tellarites is one of the founding species of the Federation. So there's a certain cachet, although most of the Federation probably wouldn't push that, but certainly some Tellarites might say, hey, we were one of the founding members. There's a certain degree of pride in that, right? But I like the Tellarites because they are they're one of the species that can get away with being argumentative all the time, and it's not just them being snide or snarky or whatever. That's just the way they are. That's their culture, is to challenge everything and to be respectful, but also to be constantly challenging. I think Tellarites would have an amazing time with social media these days.
Well, and you said the key word to me, challenging. I don't know about respectful all the time, but depending on the species. But the reason I like it is because of that word challenging, Jim. I do think that not everybody, but I think there's a many people who use getting offended as their defense in modern society. It's like, oh, I'm offended when they don't want to talk about something. Oh, I'm offended when they don't want to change their way. Oh, I'm offended. Stepping the eggshell people, I call them. And I love Tellarites because they're like, no, if you have an idea, you have the responsibility of not only having the idea, but defending the idea. So let's argue. I think there's actually a philosophical premise to them and being like, and the way Aaron, I'm going to give Aaron the credit because, of course, he is the Tellarite I know the most, even beyond the TV shows, is he's willing to be wrong. He almost wants to be wrong. He's constantly in scientific theory mode, scientific method mode. And when he's wrong, he's not even offended. He's like, that's why I pushed. And I think it's such an interesting character to play in today's social climate of everyone's offended.
Yeah, one of the key values that I have for Nalinit is everyone is wrong, including myself. Exactly. And I try to play that all the time because at the very least, again, like if the character is proven wrong or any Tellarite I think is proven wrong, it makes whatever argument won stronger.
Yes, and it's a level of humility that we don't see the Vulcans have.
Basically. I mean, I would argue that Tellarites and Vulcans are two sides of the same coin, that they're both logical. It's just that one will argue until the solution or the actual solution, the truth is found, where Vulcans will just assume that it is. At least what we have seen in media, that the Vulcans will just assume something is right until someone proves them wrong, if that makes any sense. Tellarites will always assume they're wrong, or everyone is wrong, or you specifically are wrong. Prove it that you're right.
Yeah, I'm having trouble digesting that because I have a thing against the Vulcans. And so I'm trying to decide how I feel about that. Because honestly, I do think in this series where I think Enterprise was the series that represented Tellarites the best until Prodigy came along. But I think for Enterprise, I wish they would have been given, and we're going to talk about this in a later episode. I wish Tellarites would have been given as much of a spotlight as Andorians, to Jim's point that they are a founding member of the Federation. And I don't think that they were given that much love where we could really explore what you just talked about, Aaron, whether or not they're logical in the same way as Vulcans. They might view that as an insult. They might be offended by that.
Yeah, they probably would, because they would say, no, we're nothing like the Vulcans. Truthfully, they would say, we're nothing like the Vulcans. We actually care about the truth and finding the truth.
Yeah.
And admitting that we're wrong in the end. And at least in Enterprise, they would probably point to Paul saying, the Vulcan Science Academy has said that there's no such thing as time travel. And the Tellarites would just go, you literally experienced it.
Mm-hmm.
We have warp drive. What's wrong with you?
Exactly. Very good point. So let's talk about this, because I also think, as much as the Tellarites were not featured a lot in Enterprise, that gives players and game masters a lot of leeway into getting into what you could do with Tellarites as a species. So, Jim, I know that we've done a lot of writing. I've actually done none. You and the writers have done a lot of writing about the history of Tellar. But what do we know about it? But what gaps are out there about Tellarites so far?
Yeah, I mean, there's really a lot of gaps, right? I mean, we other than Jenkem Pog, we haven't had a main character Tellarite on any show over, 60 years now, the franchise. I think we're well overdue for a main character. I mean, I'd say the same thing for the Andorians in the next episode, but I mean, Shran helped a lot, but we haven't had a long-term main character, and I think even with the little bit of canonical lore that's out there, I think there's just so much wiggle room for a player to say, you know what, I'm going to play a Tellarite and I'm going to do some serious world building based on what we know, and then just expand it and blow it out into this amazing culture. I mean, we see bits and pieces of it, especially in the first two seasons of Discovery and a little bit of Strange New Worlds. I think there's a couple of like high level Admiralty characters that are Tellarites that you see a little bit of and little hints of them. But I think Jenkem Pog is a good example of a Tellarite, but he's young, right? He's a young kid, not an experienced officer, not even an ensign until later,
and not really connected to his people either,
and not really connected to Starfleet or to the whole franchise as we know it. So I think if you're a player and you want to play a Tellarite, man, there is so much blank canvas for you to play with that. I mean, me personally, I'd be excited for something like that. Aaron, I mean, you're an example, right? You are doing that. So, like, what was your approach to wanting to play a Tellarite and start filling in the blanks?
My original intent playing a Tellarite was to portray a Starfleet character that was professional but didn't act like your typical Starfleet character, that approached all the people around him as problems to solve. Because he was originally the ship's counselor. And I thought, what better way to really have some good in-depth philosophical discussions, but also comic relief, than to have the cranky Tellarite ship's counselor to sit there and basically say, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, get a hold of yourself. You're a Starfleet officer. You shouldn't feel sad right now. You should feel whatever. And then say, hey, look, what I just said was pretty offensive to you, right? Because you're in pain, you're suffering from PTSD or something like that. But the problem is that there's going to be people out there that are going to say that to you. And we need to work out how to both help you heal and to help you deal with the people that will feel that you aren't making progress fast enough. I know I'm kind of like going around on it.
But people can always go on and read the Pioneer episodes, which I write out in mini novella format, to get a feel for the character. Let's focus though on Tellarites as a general species, though. What do we know about them? Like, do we even know when they first hit space? Was it before the Vulcans? Before the Andorians? Like, do we know?
No.
That?
Okay, so we can assume that we have to assume when they got warp travel, but it was very obviously after Vulcans, because Vulcans are tooling around, and they said they are the ones that made first contact, and this is all from Enterprise, that they're the ones that made first contact with Tellarites. And we also know that the Tellarites at least had warp capabilities prior to the 1950s because of Carbon Creek, and that they
Right.
actually had a pretty well established trade system happening between star systems by then.
Well, which makes me wonder, why do we assume that the Vulcans making first contact with the Tellarites was the Tellarites' first contact with any alien species?
Well, we don't. We
Right.
shouldn't make that
Right.
assumption.
And remember, we can't always trust Vulcans. They always want to believe that they are the center of the galaxy. So their first contact doesn't really mean first contact, right?
Yeah.
So that
It's
to me is a great story.
mhm. And what is also strange about, or let's say, early Federation founding members before Earth really got into warp, it's that Tellar is actually the closest of the other founding members to Earth out
Right.
of all of them. The next closest by just a hair is Procyon, so that's the Andorians. The Vulcans are actually the furthest from Earth of the founding members.
Right. Which behooves me to think, and from the way they're portrayed in the show, the Tellarites are so comfortable in space. Doesn't it just seem that way?
Yeah, and
They
I
don't
think,
feel as explorative as even the Vulcans. So I'm wondering how long they've been out there.
well, I mean, I have theories that I've written about in my own little short stories, but it stems from the fact that they come from 61 Cygni, which is a double star system.
Okay.
So while they're comfortable in space, it generally comes from the fact that they were moving between two very close star systems that had lots of planets and moons. So they had a big space-faring civilization even before they had warp drive. So a
Oh,
lot of them lived
wow.
in space.
So
A
within
lot
their
of them
solar
lived in
system.
yeah. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. This is good. See, and I like to hear this because this is where I think players and game masters and all of a sudden discover, like, imagine flying into that solar system, seeing multiple moons, colonies, star bases
Mhm.
that have been around for maybe 1,000 years.
Yeah, and both their stars, both the stars in 61 Cygni are very similar. Believe it or not, I just took my telescope out, I don't know, about 2 weeks ago and looked at 61 Cygni with my telescope, and you can actually see both the stars separate because the star system's so close, but you can see A and B separated even mild magnification.
How
But
many AUs between the stars? Do you know?
oh, now see, now I'd have to look it up again.
That's fascinating. A binary star system. And
24 AUs.
wow,
I think it's about 24 AUs. I probably just got that wrong, but
that's very close for stars because
I probably
Earth
just
is
got
93, right? Oh no, one AU. Sorry, Earth is
yeah,
one
1
AU.
AU.
All right.
Mhm.
You can see how my mind's already spiraling off as to try and design. There's been no serious world building for Tellarites. There has not
Mhm.
been any serious world building. And I know, Aaron, you do a lot of world building
Mhm.
in our game, which makes them so fascinating to me. So what an opportunity.
And I would probably have to bug Scott Pearson to find out if there's been any novels that featured a Tellarite main character in any degree of significance. I can't think of any off the top of my head, but I'm not as well read as he is, obviously. Um, so yeah, I think it's fertile ground for a group or a player to
Mhm.
take advantage of that. And I just love the idea that the Tellarites had this healthy space program between their two systems before inventing warp drive, and then the Vulcans show up and they're like, oh wow, hey, look at this.
Mhm.
There's this whole culture around these two star systems trading, probably not like not orbiters, but some form of um sublight vessel that could travel between the two systems.
Mhm.
Actually, I guess, Aaron, that's a good question. Is like, how long would it take a vessel to go from one star system to the other star system? Like, I don't have a sense of what 24 AUs mean in terms of distance and
Well,
timing.
let's see here. 24 AUs.
Well, think 1A. Think 1A. How long does it take for light to get from sun to
Well,
the
that's
Earth?
only
That's right.
8.3 minutes.
8 minutes. So if you're just under the speed of light, you maybe say 8 minutes, 8 times 24,
Mhm.
right? So
Yeah.
it's not that long with a sublight life drive.
Yeah,
Oh,
just think like 8 hours to go
uh-huh.
between both the star systems.
That's not bad.
I mean,
Um
that's cool. That's super cool.
yeah.
And
And so
I think the Oort cloud for us, I think it's 150 AUs.
mhm,
Am I right? Yeah. So it's
mhm,
150 AUs. So you can get to your Oort cloud in about,
mhm.
4 days, 5 days.
Mhm.
Yeah, even at sublight. So, I mean, I've always assumed that like the Tellarites have had like an impulse drive type thing even before, even before like let's say the 1880s. That's what I'm assuming because again, like I said, we know that they have a interstellar warp capable mercantile navy by the 1950s, and it's pretty widespread that they're already trading with like the Orions, which are pretty far off, and likely they're trading with people that are further into the Alpha Quadrant
Yeah.
towards the Cardassian Union.
And how
So
long do Tellarites live? Do we know?
I don't think that's ever really been established. I assume that it's about the same as humans.
Okay, that's an assumption because I'm saying
Mhm.
if they're trading with Orions, then it's possible that they did have long range sublight engines that were getting them out there. And if they were willing to live 20 to 30 years or on a generational starship just for exploration, again,
Oh,
yeah, right.
I'm assuming that they actually had warp drive when they were tooling around even an Earth system because the Vulcans in Carbon Creek even say that they're passing through on their way to like Orion. And it doesn't really make sense that they would, oh, hey, are you going to pass on a message to Vulcan on your way out there? Well, it might take 30 years to get there.
So
No, they
here's
probably are warp capable already.
so here's some good riffing for you guys. What deal did the Vulcans have to strike with the Tellars to have them agree not to violate the Prime Directive? And like, since Earth is in their backyard, and stop by and open up trade with them.
I mean, I have a theory on that, but I've written a little bit about it in like the background. It's that like every part of Tellarite society, there's an argument to be made for and against. And no one could ever come to a good conclusion because every time one side that was we need to make contact with Earth started gaining ground, they'd go to Earth and look, and there was some sort of world war happening. And then they would go, oh, okay, hold on. Nope, we're not getting involved in this.
That's a good one.
So at least in my short stories, I say like the first time that happened was in World War I, and they were like, oh man, this is just not going to end well because who are we going to make contact with? And then the next time was like right before World War II started, and they were like, no, can't do this because we'll give somebody an advantage, and they're all nuts.
And then they arrived during the 2024 elections.
Yeah, but well, I'm sure that they passed through. Well, I mean, we know that they passed through in the 1950s, and they saw the Cold War happening, and they probably passed through and saw the Bell riots.
Right,
So,
and then the eugenics war, and then
Yep.
rise and fall of Khan, and then World War III, and they're like, oh, why are we doing that?
Yeah, not
there would
great
be no
trade
good
partners.
argument.
Not great trade partners at that point either.
Mm-mm. No, and there would be no good argument to get involved in that.
That's logical. See, and I see the Vulcans pushing that logic too on them. I could see that. See, do you see how, as game masters or players, you could actually form a cool time travel campaign with Tellarites, like as to passing by Earth, or something like that, or even if you want to play 24th century, I think the Tellarites and the Ferengi would get along pretty well.
Mhm. I mean, I don't know because by that point, the Tellarites were a part of the Federation from the beginning, right? So they're kind of a post-scarcity society that don't really believe in money either. It's that they've shifted their focus from the time of Enterprise and the founding of the Federation to now being kind of the integrated well into Federation society, except for the openly arguing and taking like taking debate to the next level.
How were they affected by the Dominion War, do you think?
I think that they would have been affected by the Dominion War just as much as, or in the same way as most Federation citizens would have been. Um, I'm sure that there were ground troops that were Tellarite, starship, casualties that were Tellarites. It's just, is this a war that needs to be fought? There probably were anti-war protesters on Tellar all the time. I'm sure there's a constant outside of like their main government. I am sure there is just a stadium dedicated to protesting whatever needs to be protested that day. So, I mean, that would be usual to have that.
That's a wonderful thought. I love the fact that like everyone's born and at like age 5, you get a picket sign, draw on it what you want.
I've said many times that a good Tellarite soundtrack would be nothing but protest music.
Ah, what was Joan Baez is big with them or
Mhm.
It's
Or
all
Green Day, something that's Green Day or punk.
American Idiot. Oh, they must love that album, American Idiot.
Rage Against the Machine.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Is there any technology that is attributable just to the Tellarites that they added to the Federation?
No, I don't think that. Not that we know of. I don't think. I think they're just part of it. But given that they have the binary systems, they probably had a good technological level. In fact, I love the idea of a Dominion War story centered around their home worlds and like were they able to easily move resources from system to system and planet to planet to shore up the defenses and stuff, right? As they're battling, would the Dominion have looked at that system or the dual systems as a tough nut to crack, and maybe they would have maybe rethought it depending on what it looked like. I don't know. There's all kinds of possibilities, but no, Michael. As far as your question, I'm not sure that there's anything canonical about their technology. But Aaron, I feel like in maybe Utopia Planitia, I think you may have referenced how, because it's one of the things I love about your stuff is when you were talking about the some of the different classes of ships that were built at specific fleet yards, and sometimes you would have a ship built by the Tellarites that focused on slightly different things than the same class built by the Vulcans, right? At a Vulcan fleet yard thing, and like the Tellarites would have focused more on I don't know, I don't remember if it was sensors or weapons or something, whereas the Vulcans would focus on something else. I love that idea, and I love the idea of there being single species ships in Starfleet, right? Like you got a Walker class that's entirely staffed by Tellarites, right? I mean, I just love that idea of like, even though you're part of the Federation and Starfleet, you're still a single species ship. I love that idea.
Yeah, in TOS and before, you definitely would have single species ships. And I think that I tended to say if there was a Tellarite specific ship, that it focused on communications and computers in general. Communications make sense to me just because, of course, Tellarites want to have the best subspace communications to argue with whatever families back home or whatever, just to transmit information because information is ammunition. But the computers is also just processing information, figuring out who's right, who's wrong, that sort of thing. Sensors though is Vulcans, weapons, Andorians, that sort of thing. That's my general, broad generalizations for it.
I think if I recall correctly, the ship you put in Utopia Planitia had something to do with cooking.
Yeah, I did have a cooking vessel that was it was the ship that Scotty was on in the Dyson Sphere episode. It was that class, and yeah, it was the Tellar School of culinary. It was their culinary school, and it was basically just traveling the worlds of the Federation and finding out how everyone fails at cooking, so you can better the art of cuisine yourself and make something better. If you know how people fail, you can avoid that.
That was very cool. Now, with the advent of 2E, I feel, and everyone who's watched the show for the last 3 weeks and watched me and Jim, BC Holmes, Merrick Moyer, and Al Spader play the adventures of the USS Challenger, know that we have a Tellarite on board. And one of the things we've really pushed in for people who've been watching is traits. So I want to talk about Tellarite as a trait, how it might benefit or even penalize your player in play. For example, in both the game that I played with Aaron for the USS Pioneer and a game I played with Jim for the USS Challenger, in both cases, I used Tellarite as a negative trait when it came to running or trying to jump on something because of their body shapes are a little bit more, porkish and stuff like that. But what else, if people want to, evoke the trait Tellarite to have a benefit and advantage, or what kind of complications? Let's go through that, because I really am pushing into traits with 2E, which I'm having a lot of fun with. Jim, where would you start at?
I mean, I think I would start by going into the core book and looking at what Nathan wrote for the trait itself. I mean, just practically, based on canon, but also based on extrapolation. He mentions that Tellarites have very keen senses of smell and hearing, so those could be a benefit to you in certain tasks attempts if you're trying to notice something or if you're trying to sense something is off. They're very good at spatial awareness, so they probably make really good navigators or con officers, or even just some forms of scientists like astronavigation or astronomy, that kind of stuff. And apparently, they have a high tolerance for drugs, toxins, and inebriants. In fact, we see that with Jenkin Pog, right? It's very difficult to get him inebriated, and I think that could be a factor in your games, right? Like especially in Strange New Worlds and original series era, away teams are always beaming down to planets and encountering some exotic plant life that is trying to drug them or knock them out or something. And you've got no shortage of species that could use needle guns or pellet guns or some way to knock them out. And why not have a Tellarite and the Cleon get into a blood wine match and see who can drink who under the table. And the Tellarites just got natural resistance to that kind of thing, and that trait could become a factor. Like, you may not think about it because it's just, oh yeah, I'm a Tellarite, big deal. But that trait, as we've seen in our game anyway, Michael, traits are really super important, especially when you have a game master who is primed to make use of them extensively, and will carefully not remind you that you have traits. And force the players to think about it.
Yeah,
like,
I'll remind you when it works against you, but not when it's
yeah. But I think it's a good reminder for players that who your character is, like what they're what they are, like what species they are, really can have an impact on gameplay. Aaron, what are your thoughts?
For benefits that what Tellarites would get as like an advantage, like good things for an advantage, I've always said that Tellarites have their body shape because they're half liver, and that goes into the whole toxin thing, but it's also that it makes them really tolerant to terrible things. And so, like, rotten food or bad, they can complain about it, they love complaining, but they might be the people that can tolerate really disgusting situations better than most people because they're not really afraid of getting poisoned or disease, just because they're half liver and their immune system's great. As like a drawback, I love playing that a Tellarite can't avoid arguing. That if a good debate, a good argument is made, they have to join in, or they feel compelled to because they really want to understand where this person is coming from. So they're going to try to involve themselves, even if they know they really shouldn't go this way. They're going to, because it's a challenge, right? It's a challenge to themselves and that the other people that are actually making a good argument.
I love it. I have one more comment about the trait, and I'm going to show everyone how amazing Aaron is with his imagination with my next point. So for the trait, also, I notice how Aaron employs in our game. They're pretty resistant to interrogation and torture for the fact that it's part of the argument oftentimes. So like Aaron's character, if again, X card, if you guys play torture in your games or not, I don't know. We don't really play it in our game, but we do go into his background about how he's resisted it. And a lot of that could be a trait of where it's like, that's just a different way to argue if you're trying to interrogate me or something like that. And I think if we had to play it and roll dice on it, Aaron, I'd be like, oh, this is definitely a plus for you that you've gone through this and that this is just another argumentative method that they're using against you. The psychology of the Tellarite. My other piece of the trait, because you mentioned they're sturdy and resistance to like gross disease and gross stuff. This is where everyone's about to see Aaron's magic. How is that correlated with it that they lived in a binary star system? How did that affect them developing this large liver or the system? How would you explain that?
Well, I would think that it's mainly just because of Tellar Prime, right? That Tellar Prime it's nasty. Like in parts where they evolved, it's like swamp, lots of disease, lots of different kinds of animals. That's why you get like Tellarite mud bass. That's traditional. Oh, it's because they love swamps and mud. But as they moved out into their binary star system, there would be I've written at least that there were two other marginally habitable planets that had similar life to Tellar that was from panspermia, that it came from Tellar Prime, but then evolved in its own ways. So like, yeah, here's a completely new kind of flu. And this sort of stuff ravaged through their people as soon as they started spreading out into their star system. And they just really developed a good adaptive immune system.
Do you all see how he did that? Do you all see this? He does in my game all the time. I just give him a problem and he comes up with this great theory. And I'm like, well, there's our story for the rest of the season. It's like, I love that about you.
Thank you.
Cool. Anything else we want to add? That was almost 30 minutes on playing a Tellarite. Anything we want to add? Let's do another go round. Jim?
I just, just in listening to both of you riff on this, I love the idea of either the first officer or the captain being a Tellarite. Because I love having a player character be the captain, and I love having a player character be the first officer. And I always love throwing. I know it's probably a cliche by this point, but I love throwing in prime directive questions. Is this situation that you're being put into? Is this going to raise the prime directive? Is it not going to raise the prime directive? Do we interfere? Do we not interfere? What's the best choice, or what's the best what's the best worst choice? Right? Out of two horrible situations, which one is the least horrible? And to have a Tellarite who's like really knowledgeable about the prime directive, really debating it and really forcing the captain or the first officer to think about it and get the senior staff involved, I could see a really rich conversation happening, assuming the players, session 0 are cool to go with it or whatever. But just like having somebody who argues, A, because they love to argue, but B, because they're trying to find the through line and to get people to think more critically than they maybe might do if they didn't have someone constantly picking at them and poking at them. I think there's a lot of potential for great drama with a Tellarite character in play.
Indeed. Let Aaron talk about that, because he knows the prime directive has been on our plate for 3 seasons.
Yeah, I've done that a bit in our game, where the prime directive comes up and it'll be a long scene where Nalindit is just trying to drill in what the prime directive actually means and where the ethics of it stand, and when it's ethically necessary to not follow it or not to be as rigid with it. Yeah, I think I love playing him as a guy that absolutely is a true believer in the Federation and the prime directive, but is still willing to completely just throw it to the side when it's morally and ethically needed to do so. Yeah,
I love that. And so I would really encourage a player who themselves, like for me, even though it's weird, is I question the prime directive as a writer all the time. I actually am not big on the prime directive. I end up playing characters who do support the prime directive, so I fall into play. But if you are a player who wants to question the prime directive, being a Tellarite could be the great character where people won't view as oppositional. They'll be like, oh no, they're just a Tellarite about this. But it does introduce a richness to the question of the prime directive, Jim, seeing Aaron play for these 3 years, that has been eye-opening to other players and really has created some. I don't even have to do anything. I can just sit back and they'll just go for days, because we play on Discord, talking about the prime directive.
Mm-hmm.
All right, cool. Anything else before we wrap up and head on to our next episode?
I mean, I think just to wrap up my thought process is to just emphasize again, even though the Tellarites are one of the founding members of the Federation, we don't really know a lot about them from canon or even secondary canon, to as far as I can remember. So I think if you're a player willing to get your hands dirty, be willing to jump into some world building and do some cool stuff with it. And I mean, you saw what Aaron did in just a few minutes of like applying just a little bit of real science to their system and thinking about why are they the way they are. Keep asking why. But I think fertile ground absolutely for Tellarites and world building and make them your own and do some cool stuff with it.
Yep, Aaron. And my last one point before we give Aaron the final word on this is another thing about his character. his wife serves on the ship with them, and you think Tellarites, because they argue so much, have a lot of divorce, but man, they seem like a super close couple because I think they're just used to disagreeing. So I want to make sure you throw that into your final comments, Aaron, about it.
Oh, well, it's because they made an argument to get married and they were the best suited to each other, and no one's made an argument against that. There hasn't been any good argument for why they shouldn't be together.
So at
And
the
they do
wedding,
love
when
each other.
so at the wedding when they say, "Does anyone oppose this?" or anyone is that a large 4-hour ceremony when everyone starts arguing?
No, because everyone assumes that everyone will disagree with it. It's that they have made the decision and they have argued again, with themselves if they should be together
Love it.
and if they're the perfect fit for each other. And they were. And I think in general, when they're alone in their quarters, they really don't disagree. They pick with each other, but they don't argue and disagree. So I guess my last point with a Tellarite is there are lots of ways to argue, and not all of which are antagonistic. Most aren't exactly the most healthy ways of dealing with arguing, but you can do a lot of different kinds. Like you can be passive aggressive with things like making suggestions and being a little judgy, or just making eye contact and going, things like that. You don't have to be aggressively angry. I think most of the time I don't play Nalinid as angry or grumpy.
Not at all. Not at all.
He mainly comes across as a guy that he really cares and is sad when things aren't exactly going the way they should.
Yeah.
But yeah, explore ways of arguing that aren't angry.
Very good. Very good. All right. Well, my gratitude then, as we go around and close up this one, my gratitude is definitely going to be to the writers of Enterprise who were wise enough to take a TOS classic species that was basically ignored in TNG and Voyager and DS9 and resurrect them into Enterprise so that they became understandably a lovable species that we all wanted to know more about, enough so that he was resurrected in Prodigy. And I hope we get a lot more Tellarites in the future. Gratitude, Aaron, and then Jim will close it out.
I think my gratitude will be towards the writers in Enterprise that continually mention that Tellarites gut punch people, and yet we have never seen any of that.
Ooh,
but it's obviously very important to Tucker and Malcolm that they've mentioned it multiple times in that show. So I don't think that's ever really been explored, and that's why my gratitude goes to them, because there's an idea that hasn't been mined yet.
You should have told me that. I am going to be looking this up on Memory Alpha.
Jim, you got?
Oh yeah, sorry. I'll echo both of you. Thanks to the writers of Enterprise and also Prodigy, right, for giving us some details on the Tellarites and trying to flesh it out a bit. In fact, this inspires me. Like, if I really wanted to get more into Tellarites, I think I would need to rewatch Prodigy and just really focus on the Jink and Pog scenes, just to see if there was any throwaway lines or little mentions in passing about his culture or his species that he knows of anyway, even though he was much removed from it. Like, what does he know? And how can we, pull that into what we do know from the rest of the series? But yeah, thanks to the writers and the directors and all the people involved in making Tellarites come to life, even in Discovery and Strange New Worlds. Even though we didn't have a lot of characters, we did get a few, and we can really focus on those scenes and try to pull out what little nuggets of gold we can pull from those to enhance the species as we know it.
All right, fantastic. All right, so this was our week about Tellarites. Join us next week when it's all about Andorians. All right. IDIC.
Live long and prosper. Be safe, be well. We'll see you all next time.
See you later.